rhymes with something else. All right, let's go ahead and get started. As Paul kind of alluded to in his presentation, I'll be covering practical examples of core properties. These are the new properties that we have sort of rolled out. And I'm also going to give some examples on how to use them, some real common cases that we've seen, and then leave time for questions at the end. So a little bit about me. My name is Caleb Ayew-Ew. I forgot to put the phonetic up there, so if you have trouble pronouncing that, it's fine, I don't care. I've been with Configura since 2011. Most of my focus has been extension work, all CM, all for CET Designer. So yeah, it's a little bit about me. So core properties. Okay. Core properties are a unified system of dynamic properties for any core object. What that means is we can have properties recognized by our core system on anything that extends a core object. So you could read into that, not just snappers. And we'll get into a little bit on how that's done later on. The core props are built by a factory class, aptly named Abstract Properties Factory. The subclass that I listed out here, the Properties Factory, is really what does a lot of the heavy lifting. This factory is primarily responsible for building up the UI, and it also handles the property changes coming from that UI as well. It also is the one that houses the current state of the property. For example, if the property is locked or if it's visible, etc. Core properties are meant to be user-facing. Doesn't really make sense for UI to be hidden 100% of the time. So their intention is meant to be user-facing. And they are easily transferable via prop obj functions. This is because in the background, they are ultimately prop defs. So for instance, taking an animation's props, passing them to a snapper or a vessel or a component is pretty trivial since they all use the prop obj interface. So why the change? Why do we have these new systems when the old ones worked? The main one that I can think of is the quick properties and animation properties have been disjoint. They've been that way ever since I started working with CM and CET Designer. So that's probably the major driving factor in creating this new system. And as you can imagine, a disjoint system, would create disjoint code to accomplish the same end, which at the end of the day is simply just user input changing something on something else. So why have these two separate systems accomplishing the same end? Two-stage property change, what I mean by that is, what would happen is your dialog would get the change notification, and then the dialog was responsible for telling your snapper, in the case of quick properties, that it changed. There is potential here for quick properties and your snapper property to become out of sync. And same with animation properties. I've kind of seen it all over where we have the sync to properties that we have to run constantly to make sure that our snapper is up to date. And the final one here is we are actually just kind of shifting our paradigm in general. Most of our base classes, if not all of them, nowadays are prop objects. And this allows for a more flexible approach, utilizing all the prop object interfaces. So core properties are addressing all of these things by unifying the objects representing a prop, allowing for dynamic creation with those the stirred object maps that I'll show a little bit later, and having the object basically completely own the property versus like a middleman. So the kind of out of sync thing doesn't exactly exist anymore. And because of the vehicle of prop objects and the shift to that paradigm, we've kind of now expanded it into properties as well. Core props or core properties are centered around the concept of a prop def class living on prop objects. The prop defs basically facilitate the system's properties being changed. The prop defs are going to, you can use them to handle all sorts of changes. So how do we distinguish def from a core prop? They are basically the same thing, except one has this this method filled out, the setting method on a prop def. That setting is going to be used to generate UI and behavior for that particular core property. Yep. So in other words, if a prop def returns a value from this setting, then the prop def is actually set apart from other prop defs, and it's tagged in a different manner, and it's treated as a core property. So you can kind of think of these settings as synonymous with a core prop. What is the setting? Setting is a prop input setting. This is the class name. Like I said before, it determines the look and the behavior of the core property. The prop input setting class houses the instructions for creating the core props. It controls look and behavior. It can, create buttons. It can determine order that it shows up in the UI. It can decide, even what context this particular core property should appear. And you can even use it to determine which way a stretch can go. So there's a lot of power there. And this is all accomplished by providing the prop input setting class with a map of arguments and a set of attributes. Arguments include, but are not limited to, UI. So there is a argument for all of the classical UI elements, buttons, drop-downs, inputs, sliders, etc. Label is another argument that's kind of self-explanatory. Group key for this ordering and grouping portion here. You can give it a group key, and it will group all properties with those keys together. Visibility, show it or don't show it, and you can even tell it how it should behave when a change is noticed. For instance, you can have it modify parts. You can modify your 2D, 3D, both, or you can modify bound only, or you can modify all of them. And this is just passing in a modify all flag set to true, and then lockable is also whether or not the lock icon appears or not. And then the attributes portion of it, they are symbols that tell the properties factory of how and when to import the core props. And they end up getting stored in the prop data of the properties factory. Some of the examples of attributes are listed here. These are probably the most common. The property one at the bottom here, you probably won't ever use. It's automatically added if you have a prop input setting. This is just an extra step to flag a prop def as a property. But I want to note that you don't necessarily have to stick to what's defined. I mean, we can use these attributes for whatever we like. Example, if we wanted to call out color properties on all of our props that deal with color, this could provide an easy way to import only the color properties in a given context, animation or the like. So that's prop input setting. So now the question is, what do we need? What's the bare minimum snapper to have a core property? It's really simple. You need a prop def on a snapper, or core provides a prop input setting and a domain most of the time. I say most of the time because there's a little bit of guesswork going on if you don't provide a domain. For instance, if you provide a double without a domain, it'll just give you an input field. So most of the time, you'll probably want to fill that out unless you want to deal with the assumptions that are made down in core. And then the second one is override the using G2 method. That's it. That's all you need. So like I said, both of these things can exist on a core object. So that's why I said earlier, snappers are not the only thing that can have properties anymore. So let's jump into an example. If I can get this to work. Of course not. I know, man. There we go. So there's something wrong with my display port or something because it's not. Yeah. Sorry, man. So here we go. Can everyone read that? Good? Sweet. So this is a example dimension prop snapper. It extends this made-up class that is a box snapper. There's really nothing fancy going on in here. Curfew compiler. So my base class is basically just defining these fields, and I'm setting some defaults, drawing some graphics, build 3D, build 2D. So nothing really fancy in the base class. So like I said, using G2 is true. The base class also does this, but I just wanted to highlight it. So if you don't see it in later examples, it's in the base class. And I chose to also include the traditional way of appending prop defs in each of my examples here. So you can see it both ways, both using the prop def syntax, sorry, Paul, and the append prop def and input setting. The next examples are all going to be prop def syntax. So here we define some field prop defs, and this method is the input setting. So for each of my prop defs, I get a key passed in here, and I'm essentially saying I want my width prop def to have a label width. Attributes only appear in quick properties, and this is how I want it to look. I want it to be buttons and modify everything. Parts, 2D, 3D, bound, etc. Depth, pretty similar, except I'm only saying insert for the attributes, and I want it to be a list property, so a drop down. My height, I I don't care. You make it up for me. If you do not define any attributes, it's going to assume all. So let me show you what that is. So this is my dimension property snapper. First snapper of a fresh start. And you can see that my quick properties appear all as they should be. My insert properties, only depth and height appear because I flagged those. And only height appears on the drag, except for this distance guy, helper distance man, because I didn't actually exclude anything from the height. And it updates bounds. I did actually forget to mention that I have domains defined in my base class as well. So that's why. So yeah, does all the things for me. And you can see there's not a ton of code there. Cool. What's up? Were they all buttons? Yeah, there was a drop down. Yeah, so this first one is buttons. This one is a list where drop down. And then this one is core decide, because I didn't actually specify it. Yeah. So the domain on that, the height is actually a domain. It's a double range. So it's going to give you an input field because there's no sane way of displaying that other than an input field. So this next example that I'm going to show is essentially the same thing, but using the prop def syntax. If I can find my mouse. So so Paul kind of hinted at this guy a little bit earlier. In the prop def syntax, you can specify a setting as well as one of those arguments. And you just define your class out. So it behaves the exact same way as that previous example. So Paul already went over this. I'm not going to bore you to do this. Capturing changes. So now that we know how to create them, how do we start doing stuff apart from the ordinary? We have a few different methods that you can take a look at. The most commonplace might be within that prop def syntax in that put. This actually gets used quite a bit, so it might not be the best place. For instance, the property UI construction utilizes put to kind of reflect changes. And the prop object put, so the owner of the prop, you could do it there as well, but also not an ideal spot. I'm saying these are options. I'm not recommending them. I would lean more towards the last four I listed here. So a before property changed on the core object, the prop change on the prop object, and then if you want to get more granular, the snapper has those traditional methods that we're used to, the animation and the quick property changed. So if there's different functionality that you need on your snapper, depending on if it's from an animation or a quick property, those are the guys that you would want to override. So now I'm going to get real example heavy. I'm going to show some extremely common things that we do with all of our properties, rebuilding them, showing and hiding, and then the fun one I personally think is grabbing someone else's props and using them like they are our own. I'm also going to get into stretching and ordering. So this guy is a rebuild and show hide. This is really trash. This guy. I set it up so that one of our properties actually disappears depending on what the width is. Pretty common case, right? You know, for whatever reason, product rules or marketing or what have you. How we accomplish that is in our prop setting. First of all, we set our visibility to some thing. The width is equivalent to this constant that I have up here, 42 inches. If it doesn't equal that, then our depth should appear. But that is only on initialization. So we also need to state on a prop change if our width matches that bad boy. Hide our key. And this is using some helper functions that are defined in core. The hide core property and show core property. Simply pass in your property's key. So this is a global function. All you need to do is pass in your key and it'll do the work for you. So, also in the quick properties, there's a little bug that I believe CJ is aware of that I'm pointing out because you'll probably see this. The dialog doesn't resize properly. So until that's fixed, I believe it's fixed in 10.0. You can just add a diff, rebuild core properties. This is the major function that you can use to essentially wipe out everything in the props box and rebuild it. It is important to note, though, that it only works if there have been changes to that prop object's prop depth, whether that be visibility or not. So it's a little caveat. And if we, for some reason, initialize to the value that hides the depth, our prop input setting actually already takes care of that for us in this visible flag. Cool. Questions on that? Sweet. Yeah. I'm not sure. Um, you can change the domain, you can manipulate it, but like as far as like showing the control but not allowing selection. I don't know if we have actual like core support, but technically you could extend like that factories class and then do whatever you want with it. I haven't seen anything like that for input setting though. I don't know. Interesting thought. Yeah. 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 Active. Yeah. Which in some contexts means does it show up? If it's active, show the thing. Yeah, I mean that's kind of like I kind of have the notion if you're having to create your own properties factory, we're probably not doing something right. So, um, what active? Sure. Hey, why not? Active. Yeah, the prop input setting allows for that. Hey, what the heck? Why not? This guy? Yeah, doesn't look like it did anything. Something worth investigating though. Yeah, I mean all of our settings are that prop input setting class. Like, do yeah. Um, and like I said, I mean I did provide the manual way, the non-prop def syntax way in all these files, and I'll zip up all my examples and probably put them in wherever we're going to distribute material. Okay. So these will all be there. This guy. Oh, was there another question? Thanks, Eric. I mean, we have capabilities of tooltips that it might just be drop downs. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm following. Um, right, and I think it just needs there just needs to be a way to do it. I think we have like functionality wise, it's possible. It's just the way it sits today. There isn't an easy way. So, um, so let's get into the next example, where we can uh, order properties and group properties. Um, like I mentioned earlier, you can set a group key. So I'm just going to comment these guys out. Let's talk about order first. Okay. So you can see it's ordered height, width, depth. But I append my prop defs in width, depth, height. So there is an order properties method that I'm using to reorder those properties. It's probably worth noting that if you happen to forget to put one of the things you remove from this sequence, it's just going to get put back in. If you remove all of the things from this sequence, it's going to crash. So if you're doing reordering, make sure everything is accounted for. But this is one way to order properties. If you don't want to override this, simply just override the prop def syntax. Well, you can reorder this if you wanted to. With the ordered properties out of the way, it'll be width, depth, height. Grouping. Group key. I have these constants defined at the top of the file, so there's no magic going on here. I wanted to group my height and width and depth separately. So give them the same key, and my height key has a different one. This is really starting to hurt my neck. Mouse. There we go. So it's probably hard to see, but there's actually a line here that is separating out our properties. So that by default is how you would group them. My man Charles. So yes, you can. You can label those. Boom. This is similar to you know, any of the other property methods. You get the group key passed in, and you give back the label you want to use. So with this defined, let me rebuild my props, and you can see the elevation and the width and depth are now labeled. And now, if you wanted to order those groups, there is a order properties groups. So I'm going back to that height, width, depth ordering that I used earlier. So this will pass in each group key, and all you need to do is just reorder it, and that's how it'll display. You wouldn't want to use the order props alongside of the order property groups. If you have groups, I'd recommend just using this one, because this one is going to squash anything that you do down here. So something to keep in mind. If you're grouping, use the group stuff. If you're not, you just use regular ordering. Stretching. I forgot to mention stretching. Skipped right over it. So the stretch prop snapper, I just added some connectors here, left, right, front, back. My props, I added an extra attribute to the guys that I want to stretch, my width and depth. That attribute is that property stretch I showed on a previous slide. So now my props will be imported on property stretch. So connector code, initializing, update, stretch. So how do I tell my connectors that they have a property associated with them? This method here will do just that. The set prop key takes in a connector, and we can use the same key for multiple connectors. Connector now has a prop key field, I guess. And if you set the prop key to an existing core prop, now those two will be linked. You still have to say they're stretchable and stuff like that. It doesn't do that automatically for you. And then there is a new method called property stretch. This happens at all the stages of a stretch. So you can, mess with things in there if you need to. But most time it's pretty good. I'm simply just updating the connectors. What? Yeah, I know. I was pretty shocked as well. Yeah, 10-0. So we get stretching. For free. Well, mostly free. Less work than before. Secret button. Thanks for pointing it out. Super stretching. So this is also a attribute that you can put onto your prop input setting to allow for this functionality. If those connectors were connectable, they would also connect at the end. So basically what I'm doing here is I added an extra prop def, not a field prop def, that took a Boolean subset, so it's just checkbox. And this manipulate input setting is pretty handy. If you needed to mess with your input setting, this is the place. If that checkbox is on, I'm going to add a property superstretch attribute to that setting, to every setting. Um, if it is off, I'm going to remove it. So manipulate input setting is super nice. I recommend using it for stuff like this. If there is a time where you don't want to import or you don't want something visible, this could be another place you can change your settings. And my final example. The transfer. So I created a component. I was told that there wasn't a talk on these guys, but let's just say it's a component. It's a thing that's on the thing. Has all of the earmarks of a snapper, but it's not a snapper. Has, you know, the using G2, like our snapper. It can also have props. So my component here has width, depth, height, just like our fancy box snapper. The width will only show up in quick properties, and depth insert in quick, and then height, you know, whatever for height. And it has domain, some graphics. So that's my component class. And if we look at the prop snapper class, it knows absolutely nothing about the component's properties, and it doesn't need to, because of this little bit here. On construction of the component, or the snapper, I make a new component, put it on my snapper, and then I grab the component's properties as my own. I provide a key which signifies that these aren't my props, these are someone else's. But the prop def created by the component handles all of those changes. So this allows us to display extra properties that we don't own. And they will get piped to the proper location. Super useful. DSP data, if you need to expose DSP data's properties, you would just pass in the DSP data. This actually ends up getting on your actual snapper. So take a peek. Normally I don't show people my prop defs, but I'm making an exception. It's probably more consolidated here. So you can see that we are actually grabbing all of the props out of our component. Depth, width, and height. Apparently there is a multi-data. That's weird, but sure. And then our own prop defs as well. Is it? Cute. Okay. Yeah, and this is a component if you've never seen one before. Selectable, and it has its own properties. All right. So that's it. I hope you learned a lot. I did. These are the core files that if you want to start digging around, looking at some of the interfaces we have to create and change props and all that jazz. I believe there's also a wiki for the prop input setting? Could be wrong. Maybe not. Strike that. It might be in 10.0. So, yeah. So, questions? Huh? Fika is. Gotcha. Sweet. Good question. I think you would need to, in that instance, create a separate factory. I mean, this isn't fully fleshed out, I mean, to all the possibilities yet, but I'd imagine there are things of that nature, because I mean, this is stuff we do already. So it's just a matter of creating a nice way of saying image list or something to that effect. But I think in that instance, you would probably need to make a factory to do so, as gross as it sounds. So, yeah, so the dialogue itself could have core, it could have prop defs on it, right? So you could just push onto a snapper from a dialogue. I mean, this is what we do with schemes, prop schemes, I should clarify. Prop schemes in the background have prop defs, and basically they're just pushing them out into the scene. So definitely possible. So like that last example I shown, that like exposure transfer kind of thing, you would essentially do an expose instead. I want to say the Fika chair does it, but it's pretty simple to just say expose, pass in your data object, and it's actually going to grab all of the prop defs from the DSP data object as they were defined on the DSP data object, and basically just cram them into your snapper. If you have any questions? Once again, it's not phonetic, sorry. That's all I got.